Someone said you can't do that. But we got around that, and there are plants here today, and there are jobs here today, because we worked together. Business and industry and the community came together. There are people that said, you'll never get Doc's to sell Doc's Frame and Axle. And a lot of you don't even know who Doc's Frame and Axle is. That's now Comstock Park. You can never get old Leonard Amusement, burned down Leonard Amusement, to sell that building. And the community came together, and we now have Hospice Park. We did those not because I was mayor, and we had a city commission, and Dane was a city administrator, and Al Smith was a city attorney. Al Smith was a city administrator. It was the community came together. And that's why I love to see this many people here tonight, because I hope we do this again, because I think what tonight is about, I'm glad Dane has showed you all of the facts of the city and what the state has done to us in funding, where the funds are no longer coming in from. This is not a city commission problem. They are our elected leaders. They have to make the decision. But we as a community ought to let them know. We ought to come, this decision, as far as I'm concerned, ought not to be a city commission decision. It ought to be a decision of the community. Whether it's an income tax, and that's where I disagree with Dane. I don't believe in an income tax. But do I believe in a millage or property tax to pay for it? Yes, I do. Because I think all of those things that Dane's talked about, whether it's parks and recreation, is bone pool, is allowing the seniors to stay in the building that they're in, having the library where it is, that's what made this city such a great city to raise my kids. And that's the same city that we ought to be able to have where my granddaughter lives and grow up and let her go to Bone Pool. She doesn't have a cottage to go to in the summer. She doesn't have a lake, house at the lake to go to. If it's not Bone Pool, she's going to have a hose in the backyard. But that's our decision. I'll end with, there's two things that can happen. People that want smaller government. And you can have smaller government, and you can decide that, and you can vote for that. But with smaller government and less revenue comes fewer services. Or we can have the kind of community that you want. Community that does take care of kids. All kids. No matter what their parents' economic status is. That we have a library. We have parks that we can go to. It's a community decision, and I know, Dane, you're going to go to that next and what the options are. I hope that the City Commission gives this community the option to fund a community that has all of those things. Has a senior center, has a pool, have parks and ball teams, and has a library that kids can and adults can go to that would have no place else to go to. That's the kind of community that I think we've always supported, and I think if it goes to a vote, whichever way the community decides to go, I think the community would support a full service community that supports all of our families. Thank you.
Okay, I know there's some other questions maybe. I just want to, I'll just take one more, sir. Go ahead, and then I'm going to go to the next section.
Yeah, my name is Steve Arias. I'm actually proud to say that after 20 years, I'm one of the few people that moved back to Adrian.
All right.
But I am a father and a 13-year-old, and I'm a 13-year-old and concerned about parks and recreation. And I want to know if there's outside interest to privatize the parks services, the recreation services. I know some municipalities and some cities are a little bit privatized. The result in that, and it's been successful to some degree.
There's been no effort, but if you could find somebody to privatize it and take them over, sold. No, we've not had anybody come in and want to build a water park or anything like that. If somebody did, I would love it. I mean, I think generally you'll see public recreation systems are run by the public because you can't make any money in the private business. But if you know of somebody that's interested, hey, that'd be a great talk.
And the other thing too is, I mean, we have two great universities with great sports going on. Are there opportunities for cooperation at all, where they could potentially even have grant monies to offset some of these costs?
I've indicated before, we do have two great universities. They have they cooperate fully. I know Adrian College works very well with our recreation department and they're very generous about sharing ice time for youth and for other activities. We've shared fields with Sienna Heights. Fred Smith's a good friend of mine. We've allowed them to use soccer fields and baseball fields while they were building their own. So we have a cooperation. I don't, in terms of taking over the full-scale operations, no. But I think Mark has forged great alliances with Adrian College, Sienna, the YMCA, the Family Center, all of them, and we have joint programming. But in terms of taking over the whole thing, we've not had that discussion. Okay, I'm going to go next to the revenue options. I wanted to be clear, I'm going to just go over what they are and then we'll talk a little bit in depth. The first is a city income tax. We've talked a little bit about that. We have a Headley override vote. There's a library millage that can be specific. We can have general millage increases and we can have what would be called dedicated millage increases. The first is the income tax. This is the only really state law that allows you to have new revenue. As I said, I would love it if they would give authority for local sales tax, but the legislature doesn't want to raise taxes or have the potential of raise taxes. This would be a tax 1% on people that live here, 0.5% on the people that do not live here but work here. This requires a vote of the city residents. The goal, of course, is to reduce property taxes for those who live here. I think there's some misconception about a tax on businesses. This is a 1% tax on corporations. It is not a tax on LLCs. It's not a tax on partnerships. It's not a tax on sole proprietorships. The projected revenue from so-called corporations is very small. But when I practiced law, more than that, probably 95% of the businesses I formed, which are smaller, very few of them are corporations. Most of them are going to LLCs, and they would just pay whatever, just like anybody else who would work here. So there wouldn't be really an increased tax there. One of the other notes on that, I think it's important, senior citizens, one of the concepts of why it has some validity, there's no tax on retirees or retired pensions. There's no tax on Social Security. So if you were a senior citizen that lived in the city and just had Social Security and pensions, they'd pay nothing. The negative is typically on renters, because renters wouldn't get a property break. They would pay. People that make fairly good amounts of money would potentially pay a little bit more in money. But the goal, of course, is to neutralize what a city resident pays that owns a home, to either make it the same or have less payment. And then the goal, of course, is to charge non-residents who don't pay for the services. Because let's face it, let's talk about just the $370,000 that right now the city taxpayers have been paying to keep up the recreation department. That, of course, is a subsidy by City of Adrian taxpayers for non-residents to use. Okay, and we get no assistance from townships. Those folks that live in the township can come in and kind of buy a la carte services from the city. If you live in the city, however, if I quit playing softball, I'm going to have to still pay a little bit for that program, whether I use it or not, through my general tax dollars. The goal of this is just to share the cost. When we had a meeting Monday night, there was a discussion a little bit about how damaging it was for business. Is it good for business? No. I would say no tax increase is good for business. I don't think anybody would say that. But there was also a comment that we want to convince people to live in the city of Adrian, okay, and do things economic and get business in the city, not in the townships. This spreads the cost of these services and of recreation and what I think is a better way to finance recreation, which is an authority complex where we bring in like the school district or everybody else, and they all pay a fair share of recreation, and then it would be fair. Then we could charge everybody city rates, but everybody would pay their fair share. We've been unable to get townships to agree with that concept, but it would be a good situation if we could go ahead and then if everybody in the area voted on it, we could have sufficient funds, probably would reduce city property taxes, and that would help. But the income tax is kind of a thought in that direction. It would bring in revenue and potentially reduce it to the city taxpayers, and it make it no more favorable to live in a township than it does the city. That's the income tax. Of course, it's an expensive system to run. It probably costs a couple $100,000 a year to run it. I really, frankly, wouldn't want to run it. I wish we could have just a local sales tax. It'd be a heck of a lot easier. We wouldn't have to worry about it. But that everybody would pay residents and non-residents. But again, legislature won't let that happen. It does require a vote of the people. The city commission had introduced an ordinance to start that process for a May election. It did not get any support to enact it, so there's no vote in May. If that was something that was to be reconsidered, it could be brought in August. That's when the next election, or November. Right now, that's obviously the commission is not supported doing anything about that. The next one is a Headley override. We talked a little bit before about the Headley amendment to the Constitution and how we have rolled back property taxes because of that, almost 1.4 mills. We're down roughly to about 13.6. A Headley override restores that millage up to 15. It starts rolling back again if property taxes increase themselves, again, more than rate of inflation. But so that's not a long-term fix. That gets less every year, but that would restore a little over $500,000 to the city. But it would restore property taxes back up to 15 mills, which in effect to everybody here would be a tax increase of about 1.4 mills. Okay, and remember, to the average taxpayer of that home I showed you, that's about $50 a year. 1 mill is about 36, a mill and a half, or mill 0.4 is about $50 to the average homeowner to restore that $50, to restore the 15 mills. The library millage is allowed. One of the only things here I've talked about that you can do without a vote. They could assess the city commission by their own vote without a vote of the people 1 mill to support the library, which again would bring roughly $370,000 in a year. The requirement would be that the city commission would have to appoint a library board to run the library, at least the funds that would be received from the taxpayers. The rest of the funding, that is not enough funding to fund the library. If they wanted more money from the taxpayers to pay for it, that would be a voted millage. But that is it's possible. Again, 1 mill for that one would cost the average taxpayer about $36 a year. Of course, the clause that I put in there, it does increase the disparity between residents and non-residents. Obviously, the city taxpayers end up paying the entire extra cost. The people that use it from the non-residents don't pay any more for it. They get the same thing for the same price. General millage increase. Cities legally have a right to go up to 20 mills, which is 5 more, actually 6.5 more than we have now. That would not be dedicated to a specific use. I don't think there's a lot of real stomach for that one, but it is possible. That requires a city vote. Obviously, the more you increase millage here, the better deal the people that don't live here get. But that could be another vote. The last option, well, actually be one more I'll just talk about. The dedicated millage increase. There's been some discussion about a specific vote for recreation, library, public safety, any other thing that you might think that deserves special funding. Obviously, and there could be a combination. You could have a combination millage for recreation and a library, or take your pick of the services you want to support. You could have a special amount. It could be limited in years. It doesn't have to be forever. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20, whatever you think is fair. It does restrict the use of the funds for the stated purpose that the voters give you the money. Obviously, the more you increase that, it increases disparity between residents and non-residents. And that does also require a city vote. Votes can be held by the state of Michigan 4 times a year. It can be in February, May, August, or November. This requires other than the library, these require a charter amendment, so we have to get the governor's approval to put it on the ballot. That takes a month or 6 weeks normally, but that could be, in theory, one of these issues could be on the ballot in August, not May. It's too late for the May election, but they could be on the August election or November election. The only other one that I mentioned in particular on recreation is a thing called a recreation authority, which the city would join forces with typically surrounding townships, and they would agree that recreation is something that you should have without boundaries or political boundaries, and that everybody votes and everybody in that authority district pays their fair share, and they all don't pay non-resident fees, they pay resident fees, then everybody's in the same boat, and which I like, but we haven't had success. And I would submit, just out of curiosity, how many people here are not city taxpayers or don't live here? Okay, we have quite a few, and I think a decision, if you think that's a possible, viable concept, I would suggest that you maybe go talk to your township representatives and say, this is something that we think would be good for our community, not just for the city of Adrian, and maybe share the cost. It will reduce costs of the city. Okay, we'll increase cost in the township, but we'd all pay the same. We could run it, somebody else could run it, really doesn't matter. We'd be providing services for everybody. We have the facilities, however, obviously, and the townships don't. And so my guess was we would continue to run it with funding, budgeting through the authority, and then all the governments would pay their fair share. And that is also an option that if you think there's some likeness to that, you might want to talk to your township authorities to see if they might think that's not a bad way to go. That is the end of that section. I'm just going to finish with the timing, and then we can ask questions. The requirements of the city charter in terms of the adoption of the budget. The charter requires that I prepare and submit to the commission a proposed balanced budget by early April. And that's why I asked for direction from the city commission, because I knew we were facing this latest budget challenge. And they met